This is the last of the Shakespeare that I'll be speaking to you about. If you remember nothing else about Shakespeare, remember this. Whenever you're dealing probably with any of his major characters, you have to find a way to imagine their lives, what it felt like to go inside their skulls and live like them, what the world looked like from their eyes. You have to find a way to do that. You have to find a way to take the characters off the page and make them live. So for example, Othello, Act 1, Scene 3, Othello appears before the Senate. Now the context of this is that due to Rodrigo and Iago, Othello has been brought to trial, and this is a trial for all intents and purposes, by Brabantio, Desdemona's father. Desdemona has eloped and married the Moor. Through the power of Brabantio, a senator of Venice, Othello now must speak before the Senate and defend himself from charges of witchcraft. Now, Othello is speaking as a black man in a white world, almost a holy white world. He has risen to the preeminent position of, apparently, defender of Venice, their best warrior, and he has risen by merit to that position. I imagine him played somewhere in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, an imposing man. But here he stands before a Senate that must have been all white, listening to him speak about his marriage to a white woman, the daughter of a senator, who, it is thought, according to Brabantio, he used black magic in order to persuade her to marry him, to touch him, to be in his life. So, Othello stands before them. Now, he's a good politician, and previous to this speech, he had told them that his language, his ability to speak, was poor, that he was a warrior more than anything else. And like a good politician, he downplays his good qualities first. Now understand this about the speech. This is an exquisitely sharp, acute, intelligent defense, and very subtle in its ability to shift responsibility. So watch carefully. Note how he begins. He speaks about her father, not Desdemona, not his love for her. He speaks about how he actually entered her life. And how did he enter her life? He entered her life, he says this 3 times, her father loved me. Her father often invited me. Her father still questioned me, the story of my life. Loved, invited, questioned. The father is the one who brought him into her house. The father is the one who asked him to tell his stories, the stories that we find out later on in the speech were really the trigger to prompting Desdemona's love for him. So here's a man telling war stories, battles, sieges, fortunes. I imagine Brabantio as having not been a warrior, and like most non-warriors, is enthralled by these stories. So Othello tells his story. Even from my boyish days, he speaks of disastrous chances, of moving accidents, of hairbreadth escapes from the imminent deadly breach, of being captured by the insolent foe and sold to slavery. So, do you see what he does? A black man standing in front of a white audience, and just by that stroke, he makes sure that he identifies with that white audience and they with him. He was in slavery. And of his redemption, thence importance in his travels history. And redemption is a crucial word here. He also, by the use of that word, consciously draws them towards his, perhaps his religious beliefs. But he's using religiously charged language here. He's using Christian language as opposed to the language of their opponents, of the Turks of the Ottoman Empire, of Islam. He goes on, he describes where he is, where he was, what he saw, the wonders of the world that he saw. And then after all of that, and see, the other thing is he has to understand, I'm sure he understands, that he's probably at this point begun to enthrall the Senate. Maybe they too would like to hear these stories. At that point, he brings in Desdemona. And the first time that we see Desdemona, she is listening, and Othello uses the words seriously inclined. And I take that to mean when you have someone who is enthralled by what you have to say, they literally move their head. They seriously incline their head to listen more closely. She draws towards him, I think. And she did this whenever she could with haste dispatch. She'd come again. Now notice the adjective. She doesn't just listen, she listens with a greedy ear. Do you notice? It's Desdemona who comes to him. It's the father who invites him into the house. Othello simply happens to be a guest. And as a guest, his stories enthrall them, enthrall the father, and now enthrall the daughter. She devour up the discourse, which I observing took once a pliant hour and found good means to draw from her a prayer. Notice the religious language again. Prayer, and then he uses the word pilgrimage. I would all my pilgrimage delight, whereof by parcel she had something heard, but not intentively. Now this is the first time that he seems to actually indicate he's interested in her. I found good means to draw from her. It appears to show that his intent was to get her to say, when I have a moment, when I can get away from the household duties, would you please tell me all of the stories? I've only heard portions of them. And he's willing to do that. I did consent, and often did beguile her of her tears when I did speak of some distressful stroke that my youth suffered. This is critical. I'm sure Brabantio doesn't weep when he hears these stories, but Desdemona does. Now, what do those tears signify? They come from hearing about some distressful stroke that he had suffered in his youth. Her natural compassion, her sympathy comes forth. My story being done, she gave me for my pains a world of sighs. Maybe he's heard that from others before in his audience, but he hasn't heard this. She swore in faith, 'twas strange, 'twas passing strange, 'twas pitiful, 'twas wondrous pitiful. She wished she had not heard it, yet she wished that heaven had made her such a man. Now, if ever there's an indication from a woman that she is interested in you, this is the hint. I wish that God had made a man that was like you, who could tell a story like you, and then I would have him woo me through such stories. Now, we presume Othello doesn't have a lot of experience with women, especially women of her status, but he's not thick. He can figure this out. She thanked me and bade me if I had a friend that loved her, I should but teach him how to tell my story, and that would woo her. Upon this hint I spake. You could drive a truck through that hint. So there he is. She falls in love with him first. But the follow-up is the best. She loved me for the dangers I had passed. Not entertained, not was entertained by. She loved me. And I loved her that she did pity them. Instead of war stories that garner huzzas from male audiences, here is a woman who understands what's behind that black mask. The suffering and the pain that he could never show anyone else. She saw it, and that's why he fell in love with her, and that's why she fell in love with him. She saw beyond the mask into his humanity. This only is the witchcraft I have used. And that great line, he had said to the Senate prior to this in a previous speech, yes, I will tell you of the witchcraft I have used. Now he turns on a dime. The witchcraft I have used? My stories. And through my stories, she fell in love with me and I fell in love with her. And then he plays his trump card. Now, she hasn't been privy to any of this conversation. His trump card is his faith in her. When she enters, let her witness it. Let her repeat the same story. The implication is, I bet my life, which he says later on for all intents and purposes, I bet my life that she will verify what I have said. So remember this about Othello. Before he is entrapped by Iago, before he makes terrible plans to murder, he is a man of the deepest sensitivity, a great warrior, and also a man who has found the love of his life at a late age, and a man who masterfully knows how to tell that story so well that the Duke of Venice, and presumably also the senators, release him from any suspicion whatsoever. Always build a life around the characters, and you as the teacher are the one who has to imagine them.